kind of let you guys know how I got started. And I did come from a non-traditional background. So I actually always wanted to be in computer. Well, I wanted to be a computer science major growing up, but in my household, my parents really did not support that dream of mine. And so I ended up going to school for finance. And it was cool. Like I did fairly okay with finance, but it wasn't my passion. And shortly after college, I was working at a company doing annuity transfers, which honestly, it was so boring. I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I put my resume out on monster.com, which, oh my gosh, I can't believe how I'm dating myself here, but I put myself on Monster and I got a hit from a recruiter and they were like, oh, I love your background. I was like, what background? What are you talking about? I've only been working for 6 months. And it was a role at a large international bank, and they wanted me to come in and do a contract on their information security team. And I was like, oh, this is cool, but what's information security? Like, I had no idea what exactly it was. And so I put my resume out there. I got the interview, and then I started shortly after. I think I started about 3 weeks after I put my resume out. So it was fairly quick. Now, the way that happened towards, for me was more of like kismet. It wasn't something that I planned. It wasn't something that I was seeking. But I also realized that once I got into the department, how much work I had to do. So my first week, I did not understand any of what was going on. I didn't understand any of the acronyms. I was in meetings with the CISO and I was like, what are these people talking about? So I took that as motivation to then go out and start, doing my own research, start doing some self-studying. I went out on google.com, Google University, as some of my friends like to call it. And I started looking up some of the terminology that they were using. Like, what is, confidentiality, availability, and integrity? I was like, what is that? What are they talking about? Understanding the differences between like what a vulnerability is and how you determine that. So these were the types of conversations that were taking place, and me not having any computer science background and not having any cyber background, I really was in over my head. But I would say within a few months of me just digging deep and finding books, finding a book on information security, cybersecurity, what is it? Cybersecurity for Dummies was another book that I used. And then just asking questions. Through doing all of that, I was able to start really ramping up and getting my feet a little bit deeper into the pool. At first, I was more like, dipping my toe, but at this point, I'm like maybe knee deep. And so I noticed that although I was getting better, there were still some concepts that weren't really all that solidified for me. So I would reach out to some of my coworkers, some of the ones who've been doing it for a while. And I would just say, hey, do you mind if I shadow you on this call? Do you mind if I, pick your brain and just ask you some questions? And a lot of the time they were very receptive to me just asking questions and me just being eager to learn. So I was able to shadow some of my coworkers for about 2 to 3 months each, and just understanding, okay, when you ask this question, what exactly were you looking for? Can you help me understand a little bit deeper of, why? And these were questions more so of authentication and things like vulnerability scanning. I would ask, why are we scanning every 30 days? Like, what's the point of that? What are we looking for? And what makes this vulnerability high versus, a medium or a moderate? And so those are the types of questions that I would ask. And honestly, they became my pseudo mentors. And to this day, I still keep in contact with them because they were really the reason why I was able to be successful, because I had a group of people around me that were willing to teach, that were willing to mentor me. And honestly, that helped me tremendously. So that's my story of how I got in. Now, I've been in cybersecurity or information security for a decade, and there's been some ups and downs. I won't tell you that it's been, all roses and unicorns, but ultimately I love being in this field and I do love what I do. So I've made it, part of like a mission in my life is to help as many people as I can get into cybersecurity or get into technology in general, right? Because I think that there is space for everyone. and regardless of what your background is. And so this is something that I have been doing for about 2 to 3 years now, just really helping people transition. But one of the main key takeaways I want to give you for resume tips is you all have transferable skills. Even if you've never done anything technical, anything hands-on, you don't have to code. You don't have to know how to code. It's helpful depending on the role that you want. But I think just taking a look at what are some of the skills that you do have, right? A lot of the cybersecurity professionals require you to have good writing skills. So if you come from a communications background or a journalism background, then great. Maybe you can do something along the lines of, writing white papers or working for a publication that focuses on technology or cybersecurity. Maybe that's your niche. If you are in academia, great. Perhaps, you can take a look at how you can transition from, maybe if you were a teacher or a professor, look at how you can get into doing things like instructional design for cybersecurity awareness trainings or things of that nature. So there's always a way to be able to do it. So identify what your transferable skills are. Communication. Do you want to be hands-on? Also identifying what it is you really want to do. So a lot of people ask me, well, how do I get into cybersecurity? And the next question that I ask is, well, what do you want to do? So this is a very personal journey. You have to be able to identify what are the top 3 roles you would be interested in doing, and you have to understand your why. Why do you want to do this role? Why are you interested in it? It's not enough to just say, I want to pen test because that looks cool. Okay, it is kind of cool, but are you aware of how much work it takes to actually be able to pen test? Do you know which languages? Do you know if you want to do web application, mobile application, or if you want to just do infrastructure, which industry you want to be in? You have to understand that one role in cybersecurity can look very different depending on the industry and depending on the capacity that you're performing it in. So one of the ways that I tell people to gain some skills is to look at resources like udemy.com. I use Udemy on a regular basis. It's how I maintain my CPEs. And you can practically do anything on Udemy. I live and breathe by them. They're always on sale. So just take a look. They're probably on sale right now as we speak. I also point people to Cybrary.it, which is another online resource that I have used in the past. And I also tell people to use them if you do want to do like a traditional cybersecurity role. So they have things like, the pen tester track. They have the SOC, which is the Security Operations Center track, where you're monitoring if there's any like events going on within your network. They also have, I think, a GRC and compliance track as well, where you can actually get some understanding of some different frameworks and being able to understand what some controls mean, what they actually mean to implement within the technology stack. So those are just some resources, but also, I think finding someone who works in the field and in the actual role that you would like to be in and trying to have them mentor you is invaluable. You don't know how much information you can get from that, because they may have resources or they may be able to put you in contact with other people that are maybe training. There's just so many different things that you can learn from having someone who works in that field. But also consider there's non-technical ways to get into, information security or cybersecurity as well. So one of the things that I tell people is, if you're interested in governance, risk, and compliance, which GRC stands for, start looking at some frameworks. NIST 853 is one of the ones that you can kind of get a feel for what does the control mean, and you can look up the supplemental guidance that will help you be able to interpret the controls. So you can look up what the controls are, and then the supplemental guidance will state what exactly it is that the control is looking for, how it should probably be implemented, or maybe some recommendations, right? So then that way you can start thinking of, okay, if they say, implement an identity access management, like, what does that mean? What am I looking for? The supplemental guidance will explain, well, you need to ensure that you're able to track what users are doing, assign them a username and password, and then being able to log some of the actions that they're performing. So these are some of the things that you want to be sure that you're looking into. Just want to reiterate, get your why, find a mentor, understanding exactly which roles you want to do, and focus on those top skills that those roles are looking for. A lot of the times you may have to do some self-study. That means you may have to start, finding some projects online. You may have to, I don't like to use the word bootstrap, but that's probably the most appropriate word here, to just really you got to roll your sleeves up and dig into it, and just understanding exactly, it's going to be hard, but it's possible. So, all right, I've already mentioned the tools that I use, how I gain skills. There was one question that I wanted to touch on. Is someone asked about how to vet a boot camp. So one of the things that I would say that you don't have to do a boot camp, but if that's the route that you choose, because it is a personal journey, and determining if you need more of a structural learning environment, that's awesome. I definitely support that. But one of the things that I would ask is, one, you want to understand the costs, right? Is this something that you can afford? Because you don't want to put yourself in debt if you don't have to. Secondly, is this boot camp offering any job placement? If they are, take a look at the companies that they are partnering with, the types of roles that this company is offering, and then also understand if you have the availability to move up or to move out within these organizations. I would ask them questions like, what is their rate of placement? So if you have 100 students and they're only placing about 50, is that number good enough for you? How do you feel about being that 50 that doesn't get placed? What happens with the cost of, if you have to take out a loan to pay for the boot camp, what happens with the repayment if you didn't get a job? So these are the types of the questions that I would ask. But then also, I would also want to understand the average salary of the roles that they are placing people in. So I think ultimately boot camps do help, but you just have to be able to understand what exactly you're in for before you sign up for them. So with that being said, I think I've talked enough about me. I wanted to open up the floor to more questions, and I know we have some time to do that.
Heck yeah. Yeah, we've got about 40 minutes left. So we're going to start digging into some of the questions people had asked today. And then we'll see what we've got to make. Oh, you know what? Let's go down through the list too, because I want to make sure we've touched on a bunch of these things.
Yeah.
All right. So we did have one person that asked about the cybersecurity job market. If you think it's more favorable to clients right now, or sorry, to companies right now, or to applicants. And this is a question we get asked a lot, especially when people move into, cybersecurity, at least for what Power to Fly has been seeing, has been very, very hot the last couple of months. So what do you think on this, at least from the perspective that you have now?
Yeah, so I think that question is kind of hard to answer because it's very subjective, right? Depending on the organization, depending on the location that you're in. So I think in hot markets like New York, San Francisco, LA, DC, those markets, it's very favorable to the applicants because there are more jobs and there are people to do them. I do think that overall, that cybersecurity is a very good field to get into. It's not an easy field to get into, but I definitely think that there are opportunities available. I know that I constantly have recruiters in my DMs asking me if I want to make a switch. And it's just like, it's like I have to vet them properly and it has to be the right fit. And so I think that it depends, even though that's not really like a good answer, but depending on the area that you're in. So if you're in a rural area where there aren't a lot of roles, then it's probably not in the benefit of the applicant, but more so in the benefit of the company, maybe. But then those types of areas may pay a little bit more because they know that no one wants to go in the middle of nowhere where there's like one cell tower.
Yes. Well, okay, that actually leads us into another question that we were asked. And I think this is a good point, a good question to ask you, because we get to learn a little bit more about how your work life is going for you right now. A lot of people had questions about, like the flexibility of roles within cybersec. One person had written in saying that they're a single parent and they're looking for opportunities that will allow them to balance their personal and professional responsibilities. How do you, obviously knowing that there are a lot of different roles within the cybersecurity job market, how have you found, at least the roles that you've had, flexibility wise? Have you like been struggling with work-life integration or balance? What have you seen in your time in the industry?
Yeah, so I would say overall that the roles that I have had were not as flexible as I would have liked them to be. But I think it's primarily because of the industries that I was working in. So I've worked in banking and I've worked in the government sector. And for me, flexibility means being able to work remotely. I personally am not a fan of going into an office. I'll just be honest about that. And for some people, that's fine. Um, and just being able to leave a little bit early, I was able to do that. I was able to take time off when I needed it. And so personally, I think it's as flexible as the industry that you're in. So if you're doing cybersecurity work or infosec work for a traditional or a tech company, then it may be a lot more flexible. Banking and government are historically not as flexible as we would hope. Now, that's not to say that you can't find it. One of the things that I would recommend is if you are looking to transition and flexibility is high on your list, then definitely don't apply to roles that are saying that you have to be in an office 40 hours a week, because those types of roles may not be as flexible as you wish. And also bring that up in the interview. Let them know that you're interested in, a healthy work-life balance. And to be honest with you, I don't even like using the term work-life balance, because we have more life than we have work. And so work has to be able to fit into some of the things that you're doing. If you're raising children, if you have elderly parents that you're taking care of, et cetera, like there are reasons why people don't want to or can't, be at the desk for 8 hours a day. So consider asking them, what does a typical work week look like for your employees? Is it recommended that people work more than 40 hours? How do you feel about taking time off? Ask about the vacation policy, ask about the sick time, ask all the questions, because you want to make sure that this job fits your needs and that you're not just, conforming to the job, because it's a small set of your life, it's a small part of your life.
Thank you so much for flagging that, because you're right. We hear work-life balance a lot, which the term just like, I immediately, my skin's just like, oh no. And you hear like work-life integration is a lot, something that's being said a lot more, but you're right. There's plenty of people that are all about the job, and that's great. But if you're not all about the job, and it might be because caregiving responsibilities, it might just be because you don't live and die by what you're doing every day. That's okay. There are plenty of us that clock in for a paycheck and clock out. So if that's, I love the idea and the advice to really dig in and ask these questions, because you're trying to find some place that you will be comfortable just as much as you're trying to find a job. So I think that's really, really good advice. Now, when you were asking these questions in the past, do you feel like it was easy to tell when something was not necessarily going to be a fit? Did you listen for like the answers they were giving you, or read more into it and like the tone and stuff like that? How did you handle this when you were looking for something that would really fit what you wanted your life to be?
Yeah, I think it depends on how the interviewer or the hiring manager responds, right? I specifically remember there was this role that I applied to, and I asked the hiring manager a question about, how do I present process improvements to you? And I thought the response was so peculiar, because he mentioned that, well, I'll only accept process improvements if you can bring me quantifiable data that I'm inaccurate. And I just thought, wow, you are very inflexible. So in my head, I started thinking, okay, so if I can't prove to you that I'm sick, will that mean that I can't get sick time? if I can't prove to you that I can't find a sitter, then does that mean that I can't take time off or I can't go pick up my kid? So these are the types of things that to me, that was like a huge red flag. And I basically was like, no, I can't work for a person who the only time that something is deemed important is if I can pull up some research document or some white paper about why it's important, right? Because a lot of the work that we do in cybersecurity, a lot of it is best practices and they're not recommendations. And unfortunately, recommendations get overlooked all the time. So you have to be able to discern and to interpret something based on the situation. But if you only deal with facts and numbers and zeros and ones, I'm not a zero or a one, I'm a human being. So I need someone who's going to treat me as such and not as a computer program. So these are the types of things that I would look for. If they start using certain terms like, oh, everyone's a family and we treat everyone like family and we work hard, I think to me that's a red flag, because
family's a huge red flag for me too.
As bad as this sounds, but I'm not working for my family. I'm working for an organization. I'm working for a corporation. And no, we're not family, because ultimately the organization is always going to have their own best interest at heart. And so to me, it sounds like, oh, if we're like family, if I'm like your sister or like your aunt and you could still fire me, then I really question how you treat your family.
Yes, absolutely. I think you're right. It's a very important thing to hear, because, if what they're saying is that they really support their employees like family, okay, that's one thing. But if that's what all they're saying is that, like, oh, we're just like a big family, we work hard and we play hard, if that's the only thing they can say about their culture, I have a lot of questions, and I kind of don't necessarily want to ask them of like an HR person. I kind of would want to talk to somebody in that department. Hey, how true? Yeah, how true is this in actuality? Is the family thing used as a manipulation tool to get maybe extra work out of people, or is the family thing really something they live by because they are all, each of us has our own lives and our own families, and they understand that people need to take care of those things.
Absolutely. And I definitely, I tell people, reach out to people on LinkedIn and start asking questions. Like, I've been that person that have gone on LinkedIn and said, hey, I'm actively interviewing for a role at X, Y, and Z company. Can you tell me about how your life is working here? And typically I do that with people that either look like me or that are in a similar role, because they have no reason to really lie to you. But also, if you tell them, look, I just want to make sure this is a good fit for me, that this is where I need to be, that, these are the things that are important to me. And this is why having your why is so important, is you don't want to get pigeonholed into a terrible company with like toxic work environment, or under a manager that just simply doesn't care for you as an individual and just goes with, you have to be a butt in a seat or a number. Honestly, those types, like, you want to reach out to people who are within the company and they can tell you, because it's easy for an organization to market themselves as like, oh, we're so progressive, or we are, we're extremely flexible, or whatever terminology that they're using. It's how do the people working within the organization perceive it? That's what I would recommend. Ask the questions and then reach out to people who work there and get a real feel for it. Because just like these companies are interviewing you, you're interviewing them. And as I mentioned, cybersecurity is not an easy field to navigate. It can be tough, there can be some personalities. So you want to be sure that you are working at the right organization within the right role that's going to ultimately make you happy, because you have to be here for at least 8 hours a day. And I would hate for someone to have to be at a role that they truly dislike, and that causes additional issues for you in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting some really great questions in the chat, so I want to try and take a couple of these. A lot of people have questions about what your role is, the work that you do, and what are some of the how did you transition into this role? How did you grow into it? So let's start for you. Like what was the first role you applied for in cybersecurity? A lot of people are trying to figure out, what roles should they look for when they're trying to research these things.
Yeah. So my official first title was risk analyst, and that was a contract job. So honestly, the title could have been whatever because I was doing so many things. Um, so I don't think the title really mattered for that particular role, but what it was is I was brought into an infosec department on a contract basis to just kind of support wherever needed. So because there was no actual job description, that was the perfect situation for me to be in because I could step in and just work on a bunch of different projects. So what I ended up doing is I supported the vulnerability management program, and I worked on some of the reporting. I worked on a database that was pulling some of the scan information and then displaying it to the relevant application owner or manager in a SharePoint. So I actually learned how to do that on my own. I was self-taught making this database. So that was kind of cool. From there, honestly, my titles have always been either information security analyst, cybersecurity analyst. I've also was a technical information security officer, or some companies call it BISO, which is the business information security officer, where you're embedded within an organization and you primarily work with a group of application managers or business owners to determine security within that organization, and just kind of advise. So the title is not as important, but more so what the function is. So don't get caught up on titles. Look at the actual job description. Look at what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. And I know somebody asked about what's an entry-level role. I don't really know how to answer that question because entry-level roles in cybersecurity look a little bit different than everywhere else. But to finish answering that question, there are organizations out there that have apprenticeships for cybersecurity or for technology in general. So I would recommend just typing in cybersecurity apprenticeships or just apprenticeships. Like that's something that I've been seeing an uptick on. A lot of organizations have been producing some of those. But go back to answer your earlier question on what my current role is. So I am an information security advisor, which is basically a staff level equivalent to an engineering role, where my team, we are the customer facing side of the information security department. So what we primarily work on is ensuring that the customers understand how we do security at Datadog and that they really want to come on board with us. So my team is doing things like answering questionnaires. What I primarily focus on is the audit aspect, where a customer that has already signed a contract with us wants to come in and want to audit our, I guess, continuing security practices. And I provide some of that assurance where I'm like, okay, this is how we do TLS. This is what we do for identity access management. This is our MFA practice. This is the configuration for it. So those are the types of things that I do. And then I'm also relationship building with other teams because we're responsible for knowing almost everything security related within the organization to be able to present that to customers for things like, upselling or just landing a new customer. So that's my role.
Okay. We do have a lot of people that are wondering, like what roles can they be researching? And obviously we talked about title and how kind of that doesn't really tell you much. Are there any things that they can look for when it comes to different job titles that will automatically indicate somebody a little bit higher than maybe a basic entry level? I feel like a lot of people look for things like manager, director, but there's a lot of wiggle room in between, being fresh out of like, learning something new or transitioning into a new field versus being at like a managing people level. There's right. Obviously a lot of wiggle room there. What are some of the more common, if there are any, some of the more common kind of like entry and middle range job titles that people can use when they're trying to research where they think they might fit? Is there one that would be best kind of per industry? How would you recommend people start this?
So there's not really something that's industry specific, but if you are more of like the entry level, and for me, entry level means 0 to 3, but that's not necessarily the case for some organizations. You want to look at things that say entry level or junior or early career, those types of wording within the job description or the title. If you have some work experience, maybe 2 to 3 years in doing something else that's technical, or something else that's within a similar field, then maybe looking at things that say mid or two. So for example, we have roles that are analyst one, analyst two, analyst three. So that's the natural progression. Analyst one, obviously is going to be the entry level or the junior level. The two is probably more of the mid. Three sometimes can be mid as well, depending on how much layering is embedded in the organization. So I would say if you have some sort of like skills, so if you were previously a software engineer and you are interested in pen testing, then maybe look at a role that's pen tester, entry level pen tester, or maybe look at something that's more of like a red team, blue team, or purple team is another term as well, where you're doing both offensive and defensive. So it's honestly, if you have issues understanding the titles, then what I would probably do is just go on Google and just type in things like cybersecurity roles, and it'll just give you like a plethora of like titles, which may not be that helpful because, like I said, companies call things different names to mean the same thing. So someone could be a pen tester here, but at another organization, they're probably like a red teamer or a purple teamer, whatever you call them. So the title is not as important as the actual function. I also recommend that people use this site called Pathways, Career Pathways. And effectively, it's an interactive tool where you can take a look at the different roles, the different titles that are similar to it. And then you would then go and look at the years of experience, the average years of experience, you would look at the necessary certifications or credentials that you need, potential languages that you need to have in order to perform that job. I highly recommend people who are trying to determine where they want to be to play around with that tool, because it tells you where you can start and then the transitions to get to the end goal. So if your end goal is to be, I don't know, an intelligence analyst, a threat intelligence analyst, maybe you can start with doing something network related, and then maybe you can move to a SOC role, and then you can start into a threat detection and then move into intelligence analyst roles. So, but there's no one path. I want to be clear that you can make your own path in cybersecurity. There's no one way to do anything. And if someone's telling you that you can only do something this way within cybersecurity, they're misinforming you. You can transition from any type of role into any other type of role. You can go from GRC to pen tester if you have acquired the skills in order to do that. Or you can go the opposite direction. You can go from software engineering to GRC work. It's all about how much work you're willing to put in.
There we go. Sorry, y'all, lost my mute button while I was taking notes here. No, I love that idea. I shared the career pathways link. I think I have the right one, but that looks really, really interesting and definitely something that would have been a great resource to have when I was starting out. That was nowhere near a thing 15 years ago. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah,
we're getting really great questions from people that want to talk more about ways to transition in. A lot of people are coming from either project manager roles, mid-level management. Are there any keys for those types of roles to transition into cybersecurity? Anything that would really be helpful, that they could shine a light on as far as their transferable skills to help them kind of get their foot in that door?
Yeah. So project management, in my personal opinion, is not as hard of a transition as, say, someone who's coming as like a teacher into cybersecurity, right? For project management, what I would recommend you do is look up TPM roles, which is technical program management roles. And it's a similar type of field where you're developing project plans or you're developing roadmaps, you're organizing some of the work, you're participating in like sprints. So if you have the project management background, then look into really getting your Scrum or your Agile certifications, and then start learning about things like how products are developed, the product lifecycle. Start looking at how companies are building SaaS products, for example, because that will kind of help you determine where you can plug in some of those project management skills within the actual building of something or the maintenance of a program. So I would say that potentially there's a softer transition from project management to more so of like agile TPM roles within another organization. And then as you're learning more about that, you can build in some of the cybersecurity components, like understanding what it actually means to have confidentiality within a product is, for example, you want to make sure that you have login credentials or that you're having encryption within your product. So that will help you be able to transition into, okay, now we're running a cybersecurity program and we're trying to implement some of this within the larger organization. What does confidentiality look like for the greater organization? So I think that's one of the ways that you can transition, and maybe it's a stepped approach. So from, I think you said project management, and what was the other role that you talked about?
The other one just said mid-level managers.
I don't really know what that means, mid-level manager, because that can mean anything.
Yep.
But I would say if you have people management skills, then you may need to do more of a pivot on perhaps looking at the ways that you can manage the program for the people side of it. So maybe you're working on, I don't know if it's a good example, but maybe you want to start managing, but you don't have the hands-on skills. This would be a good example or a good time for you to go in and start learning more of like the frameworks, because it'll be a little bit harder for you to go back to the technical side, but it's doable. I think someone said.
Yeah, Catherine was the one that threw that in the chat too. Sorry, apologies, Catherine, if that's not your pronouns. But Catherine's in talking that a mid-level manager for them is 15 years of IT experience, including 4 to 5 managing teams globally, which sounds like a lot of experience. Thank you, Catherine.
It does.
That.
I mean, honestly, I think that would be an easier transition, to be honest with you, because you already have the IT experience. But I would say IT in what? So if you are managing maybe like a support center, a help desk, perhaps, then transitioning into cybersecurity may look like maybe you are supporting or transitioning into managing a security operations center. Maybe you are transitioning to managing like a Zendesk help desk type of role where it's specific to the cybersecurity department. So I think it kind of depends on what the mid-level manager role is. And then, like I said before, looking at your transferable skills. So if you have a particular technology that you're familiar with, take a look at a role that may have similar technologies, because it'll be a much easier ramp up. So if you're used to using a particular ticketing system and you notice that another organization has that within their job description for a mid-level manager for a SOC role, that'll be so much easier for you to transition because you already have that experience. You also have experience leading groups of people, I'm assuming from all levels, from entry level all the way to senior, maybe early management. So I think it's all about the transferable skills there.
Okay, let's dig in a little bit deeper on transferable skills, because one of the things you said to start with that I found very interesting, because I have like very little technical knowledge myself. I get to talk to people that clearly know far more about these subjects than I do, which is really fun for me. But I want to make sure that I'm not, kind of dumbing us down too much in my search to understand a lot of this. When we're talking about transferable skills, communication skills aren't necessarily the first thing people think of when they think IT. Can you tell us about, how some of that, like how the communication skill could be useful in a couple different areas within cybersec, and then maybe if there's any other transferable skills that are less common or that you've seen be very impactful.
Yeah, so we don't talk about the soft skills required in cybersecurity enough, in my personal opinion, because there are roles that do require you to be people facing. So my role requires me to talk with customers more often than not. So my communication has to be great. I have to be able to mean what I say and say what I mean, both written and verbal. So but there's other departments within cybersecurity that require you to be a great writer. As much so people always talk about pen testing is one of those examples where people are like, oh, I'm a pen tester. Yeah, you pen test, you have to know how to do some of the hands-on stuff. You have to know how to break into a network. Maybe you have to know how to do some Python or some Go, whichever language you need, right? You also need to be able to write a report, because part of pen testing is being able to report out your findings, being able to accurately measure the risk ratings for those vulnerabilities that you've identified, and then being able to articulate why a manager or a C-suite should care. So yes, there are a lot of technical components to pen testing, but you also need to be able to write. You need to be able to communicate. And if you need to present your findings to an executive board, depending on the industry, some industries require that, you're going to have to be able to talk to people. So when I say transferable skills, I'm not just talking about, hands-on technical. And I feel like the term technical gets used only in one specific, I guess, within a specific guardrail, because in my personal opinion, being technical is not just being able to hack into something or to build a tool. Being technical means you understand how to use a product as well. You understand how to configure things. You may understand how technical components interact with one another. So you may need to understand how data can go from your browser into an internal cloud environment, and the steps necessary to either encrypt or decrypt that to be able to read it, scan it, and then where that information sits, right? So there are different layers to being technical. So when I say identifying your transferable skills, literally sit down and start mapping out all the things that you can do that's both technical, non-technical, that's a soft skill or hard skill. And then just identifying what those are. So if you know how to install Nmap, if you know how to, spin up VMs and you're installing Wireshark and you're tapping networks, and put that on there. But if you know how to write a report, you also need to be putting that on there as well, right? So I just want to make sure that everyone is being, clear and honest about where they are and what skills they currently have that can be used towards something else. And like I said, you don't have to be highly technical to be in information security or cybersecurity. I think those sometimes are interchangeable, right? You just have to know what it is you're interested in doing and then building those skills from there.
I love that. Okay, cool. All right, we've got 9 minutes left. I want to make sure we get to as many questions. Oops, so sorry, y'all. Want to make sure we get to as many. There we go. So let's see if we can get through some more of these questions here. We did have a lot of people that were, you shared a lot with us at the beginning about some of the places you learned or picked up skills when you were first starting. And a lot of people had questions about how to talk about their skills, especially if they did things like an independent study, or if they, maybe they went to a boot camp, but it's not a very super well-known one. When it comes to kind of talking about your skills, especially if you are entry level and trying to get that first job, does it matter? Does the way you present your skills change depending on whether it was an independent study or if it was, through like a program somewhere?
I personally don't think so, because this is what I would recommend. If you are doing a self-study or if you were doing a boot camp, there's always a product, there's always a body of work that can demonstrate what you've been doing, right? So if you're self-studying and you are maybe I like to use the pen tester example because that's usually the ones that everyone goes for. But if you are self-studying penetration testing, right, you can effectively record some of the work that you're doing, some of the different tasks that you're performing in order to penetrate a network. You can store that somewhere and then effectively save it, or you can write a report and then be able to demonstrate your steps and how you actively penetrated that network, identified the risk, weighted those, and then provided recommendations, right? Because that can show that you found the issue, you quantified the issue, and then you propose a solution. So you can do something like that to present that to either your hiring manager or a recruiter, right? If you are interested in GRC, a lot of that is writing. So one of the things that I would recommend you do is potentially draft up a policy, being able to show that, one, you understand what it means to implement that control in practice, and then you have a policy that governs over that. So there's different ways that you can show some of the work that you've been doing, from even if it's self-study. I always recommend that if you are doing something that requires coding, a lot of people have GitHub, they have their own repos, put that out there. If you want to be a software engineer, people build their own websites and they have a product that they can show people. It's the same thing. So I always recommend that you have something that you can show for some of the work that you've done. Like, I have writing samples. I've always had writing samples. I've written entire policies, 50 plus page policies that, if you come to me and you say, hey, I want to see your writing sample, I can pull up a number of things that you could just, rely on to kind of see what I've been doing. But then also, part of the work that I have done previously required project plans. So I've effectively, worked on project planning. I've been able to demonstrate actual achievements. So that's one of the things that I tell people to do, is figuring out a way to produce a body of work to show that you actually have those skills.
Yes, I love that. Okay. All right. Last question before we talk a little bit more broadly about Datadog and some of that stuff. Is there anything that you wish that you had known in advance before you kind of made this journey into cybersecurity that would have made your experience easier?
Yeah, I wish someone would have told me how much self-studying that this role requires. Honestly, anything in tech, you're going to have to do your own studying. You have to stay current. So you're constantly learning new things. You're learning new concepts, you're learning new tools. Like, I'm currently reading up on Web3 and what the implications are with security in Web3 or around Web3. And honestly, that whole process is a doozy for me because I'm still trying to figure out what is Web3, right? There's just so much work that goes into it. If you are not the type of person that does not, get off of work and sometimes pull open a book, maybe this is not the field for you. Maybe technology is not for you, because I'm just going to be honest with you. You have to stay current in order to still be good at what you do, regardless of the role. So for me, if I would have known that, the only thing I would have done differently is I would have just kept up a little bit more. I would have started having better processes in place to being able to be more self-sufficient. Because I'll tell you right now, I don't like studying, but I'll do it. I stay current on as much as I can, right? Because I still have a life.
Oh yeah, of course. All right. So we do have one final slide that I want to share with y'all today. And these are some questions that we had posed to Izzy before today's event. Now, you described the Datadog culture as dynamic, and that is a huge one that we get. To make sure we are able to ask this before we run out of time, though, I want to talk about your tips for someone who's interviewing. Are these Datadog specific, or are these your top tips for somebody who's interviewing, just, full stop?
They're for anyone who's interviewing, full stop. Because although it's key to have like a list of organizations that you want to apply to, I think it's important to not just focus on just those few. Yes, those can be your top, but you need to be applying other places. one of my friends, his motto is always be applying. so so it's across the board.
Excellent. Okay. When it comes to asking a lot of questions, what do you mean by this? Are there a set of questions that you kind of keep in your back pocket for your interviews? How should people think when they're going in to ask questions? Is it just ask as many as possible, or are there some that may be a little more valuable?
I think understanding what types of questions to ask is important. But I wouldn't say just ask anything, right? Because you do have to do a little bit of research. If you're applying for a huge company like Google, I would hope that you would do some sort of research on how Google runs their business, at least on the high level, right? But ask questions about the actual role itself. What does your function look like? Where does your, the function that you're applying to, where does that fit into the bigger picture? I always ask questions about what's the vision and the goal of the departments. I always ask leadership what their goals are, what they like to see happen in the future. What are some of the things that they're focused on the most? Because it kind of gives you an outlook on what they deem important, and then you can determine if that's important to you. So if the outlook is to, build fast, grow fast, then you can probably get some insight into that means that there's going to be a lot of changes and there may not be a lot of process that comes with those changes, right? So you just have to really understand, depending on the role, depending on what you're being told, ask questions that, for clarification. I sometimes will repeat what I hear and just say, okay, what I'm understanding is this is what's going on within this organization. And these are the things that you guys are moving towards in the next 3 to 5 years. Okay, cool. Where do I fit in that? And I start thinking that way. But then also, you as a person, ask questions about vacations, ask questions about salaries, about your benefits. Ask all those questions. Ask as much as you can because you want to be sure that this is the right fit for you.
Yes, of course. One of my go-tos is to ask, I try and go into an interview with 2 technical or work-related questions, for the job that I'm applying for the industry, something like that. And then I try and go in with one that's maybe a little bit more fun. Asking what is the best thing that you guys do for your employees. What is, one way that you support your working parents, or what's one way that you support the DEI groups at your organization. I think they're really, ask about things that matter to you. Even if you're asking a question that you maybe already know the answer to, it never hurts to ask, just in case there might be a little bit more extra information that you weren't aware of. All right, Izzy, we're at the end of our time. It always goes way too quickly, but I just want to say thank you. This has been absolutely wonderful to get to chat with you, get to know a little bit more about your journey. And just, I'm so happy that you shared your time and your expertise with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. And if anyone has any additional questions, I'm available on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, it's not under Izzy Vixsama, but if you type in Vixsama, I'm the only one on LinkedIn. So you can DM me. Feel free to ask me questions. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Izzy. I'm pulling up your link for LinkedIn right now. So I'll share that with y'all in the chat thread. But thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to everyone that tuned in on YouTube as well. Thank you so much. I've shared a bunch of links in the chat thread. Don't forget to check out Datadog. Follow their company page for some really, really great information on them. You can also check out our virtual events. We've got free virtual events every day. We'd love to see you on them. And last but not least, we have the Power Fly community space. So if you are old enough like me to remember instant message, it's basically kind of like that. You get to chat with members of the Power Fly team. I'll be in there as well. Join topics. We have different topic channels. You can connect with each other. We'd love to share our resources with you. So please feel free to check that out as well. If you are interested in Datadog, again, don't forget to check out their company page. And we hope to see many more of you join us on future events. So thanks so much for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your Monday, and we can't wait to see you again soon. Bye, everybody.